A quiet shift is unfolding in society, and it is not being broadcasted on the evening news or glorified by influencers on social media. It is subtle, almost invisible to those who aren't paying attention. Yet for those who notice, it feels like the start of a new era. More and more men are quietly walking away from women and from the traditional expectations of relationships. This isn't born from hate, bitterness, or some childish protest. It's rooted in clarity. For decades, men were told to do more, give more, prove more. They were told that if a relationship failed, it was their fault they didn't listen enough, didn't share their emotions enough, didn't provide enough, didn't tolerate enough. So men tried. They gave their time, their loyalty, their resources, their patience. But in the end, many were rewarded with less respect, less appreciation, and less loyalty than they had ever imagined. Something inside them broke, not in rage, but in awareness. They began to see that the problem wasn't that they weren't giving enough. The problem was that they were giving to a system that no longer valued their effort at all. Society has long conditioned men to see women as the central purpose of their lives. Movies, songs, and advertisements portray love as the ultimate achievement, the thing that validates a man's worth. A man without a partner was seen as incomplete, unworthy, or even broken. The message was clear: your life only has meaning if a woman chooses you. But as time passed, and reality collided with this cultural myth, many men began to see how flawed it truly was. They noticed how modern dating was less about building families or creating partnerships rooted in trust and growth, and more about validation, leverage, and keeping options open. It stopped being about teamwork and started being about competition. It wasn't to people pulling together, it was to people calculating what they could gain and what they could lose. Once a man truly sees this, once he realizes he's been investing in a rigged game, he doesn't get angry. He gets calm. He stops playing altogether. He no longer feels compelled to chase or to prove his worth to someone who doesn't value it. He looks at the years he spent bending, compromising, and sacrificing, and he recognizes how little he gained in return. That recognition creates a shift inside him, a turning point where he chooses himself over the endless pursuit of someone else's approval. And this choice isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet. It happens in subtle decisions, like saying no to relationships that feel transactional, like pulling back from situations where his presence is taken for granted, like choosing to build a life that is fulfilling on its own terms. This is why men are walking away. Not to make a statement, not to declare war on women, but to reclaim their lives from a cycle that drained them. They've realized their value isn't defined by being chosen. It's defined by what they create, who they become, and the peace they protect. This quiet exit marks the beginning of a new way of living, one where men no longer see themselves as incomplete without validation, but whole in the clarity of choosing themselves. The idea that men are stepping away from relationships because they are afraid of strong women or commitment has become one of society's favorite narratives. It makes for a convenient explanation, but it is far from the truth. Men are not retreating because they can't handle responsibility. They are retreating because, after years of trying, they've finally done the math. They've weighed the sacrifices against the rewards, and the equation no longer balances. A man will work long hours, provide financially, protect his home, and bend himself in 1,000 directions to keep a relationship alive. But when he looks at the return, it often comes back empty. The loyalty he hoped for becomes conditional. The affection he once received becomes rare. Respect, once automatic, becomes something he has to fight for. After watching enough of these patterns repeat, he realizes the cost far outweighs the benefit. For many men, this realization does not strike in a dramatic moment, but builds slowly through years of disappointment. They see friends drag through brutal divorces, losing homes, children, and savings in the process. They see others give decades of loyalty, only to be discarded the moment they faltered. They hear promises of unconditional love, only to discover that affection can disappear overnight if expectations aren't met. They live through arguments that never end, silent treatments that last for days, and endless cycles of being tested and doubted. Each moment chips away at the illusion they were sold that if they just gave enough, they would be rewarded with lasting love and respect. When that illusion finally collapses, the choice becomes clear. Walking away doesn't come from weakness, but from strength. It comes from a man realizing he no longer has to sacrifice his peace to earn someone else's approval. He chooses differently, not because he hates women, but because he has learned to love himself enough to protect his energy. The exit is never loud. It's not made of bitter words or dramatic farewells. It is quiet, deliberate, and permanent. He stops chasing validation, stops explaining himself to people who never listened, and stops rearranging his life to suit someone who only sees his worth when it's convenient. Instead, he redirects that effort inward. The energy once spent on appeasing is now poured into personal growth. Men begin to invest in their bodies, their businesses, their skills, and their passions. They start traveling, learning, and building lives that are fulfilling in their own right. This redirection of energy creates transformation. The man who once sacrificed for approval now builds for himself. The irony is that this transformation often makes him more attractive than ever. Women who once overlooked him suddenly notice his confidence, his discipline, and his independence. But by then, he no longer needs the validation. The attention that once meant everything now means little compared to the PCs. Discovered what outsiders mistake for bitterness is actually liberation. Men have realized they don't need to play a game designed to drain them. They don't need to prove their worth through endless sacrifice. They don't need to chase people who don't value them. What they need is clarity, and clarity leads them to choose themselves. This is why they walk away, not to punish, not to rebel, but to reclaim what should never have been lost in the first place: their peace, their energy, and their lives. What's unfolding is more than a series of personal choices. It is a cultural awakening. For generations, men move through life under an unspoken agreement: work hard, provide, protect, and in return receive loyalty, respect, and companionship. That deal worked when both sides upheld their parts. But in the modern climate, many men have discovered that the contract has been rewritten without their consent. They see how dating has turned into a marketplace where loyalty is treated as optional and commitment is a temporary arrangement, often held together only until someone better comes along. They watch how social media has reshaped intimacy into performance, where validation from strangers is valued more than trust within a relationship. And they begin to recognize a painful truth, no matter how much effort they put in. They are always one emotional whim away from being replaced. Once this awareness settles in, it becomes impossible to unsee, and the man can no longer participate with the same blind devotion he once had. This awakening is subtle at first. A man might notice how his consistency and sacrifices are treated as background noise, invisible until they're no longer available. He might realize that the bills get paid automatically, the problems get solved quietly, and the emotional stability he provides becomes so normal that it's overlooked entirely. Only when he removes himself do those things become visible. But by then, he has already chosen to step back. Men start asking themselves questions that once felt taboo. Why am I working this hard to be unnoticed? Why do I sacrifice so much for someone who treats my presence as a given rather than a gift? When those questions echo without answers, the decision to walk away starts to feel less like a choice and more like survival. Financial independence has accelerated this cultural shift. In the past, a man may have felt pressured to stay in a relationship for stability or social approval. Today, many men realize they no longer need someone else to build the life they want. They can travel, create, and enjoy freedom on their own terms. They don't need permission to pursue their goals, and they certainly don't need to tie themselves to someone who may resent them for the very qualities that made them desirable. With their own money, time, and freedom, men find themselves less willing to gamble those resources on relationships that offer little return. But perhaps the most powerful element of this awakening is the discovery of peace. A man who has endured cycles of drama, silent treatments, and emotional manipulation quickly learns how much lighter life feels without it. Solitude, once feared, becomes liberating. It gives him room to breathe, to focus, to grow. And when he feels that weight lift, he guards it like treasure. The idea of giving it up for someone who might bring chaos into his life becomes unthinkable. What began as frustration evolves into clarity, and clarity leads to resolve. This resolve is the essence of the cultural awakening. Men no longer feel obligated to serve systems that drain them. Instead, they choose a life that rewards them. The most powerful moment in this shift isn't found in an argument or a declaration. It's found in absence. When a man decides to walk away, it rarely comes with shouting or threats. It doesn't show up in public statements or carefully worded social media posts. It arrives in silence. He simply stops showing up. He stops chasing validation, stops explaining himself to people who are never listening, and stops sacrificing his peace to keep someone else satisfied. This quiet withdrawal carries more weight than any confrontation ever could. Because when a man disappears without fanfare, what he leaves behind becomes impossible to ignore. His absence is louder than his presence ever was. For women who once relied on his steady support, the change is jarring. The bills that were covered without question. The small problems that never grew because he handled them. The grounding sense of security that wrapped the relationship, all of it vanishes at once. What was once invisible becomes obvious. The stability that felt so normal, so guaranteed, is suddenly gone. And when it's gone, it can't be easily replaced. The subtle, unspoken value of what he provided becomes clear only in hindsight. The quiet acts of service, the consistent presence, the way he absorbed chaos without complaint, all of those things now echo in his absence. For the man, his absence is more than a statement. It's liberation. He discovers that without constant conflict, his mind is clearer. Without the unending cycle of emotional negotiations, his energy is lighter. He realizes how much of himself he had been pouring into someone else's moods, and how much of his life had been built around trying to maintain harmony in a space where harmony was never truly possible. The relief of stepping away feels like breathing fresh air after years of suffocation. It's not anger that fuels his exit, it's clarity that sustains it. He no longer feels compelled to fight for appreciation or to plead for understanding. Instead, he embraces the peace of silence. What many people fail to understand is that detachment is stronger than anger. Anger can still be manipulated. It can be provoked, poked, and prodded until it reacts. But detachment cannot be touched. Once a man reaches the point where he no longer seeks validation, he becomes unshakable. His absence is not a tactic to win someone back, it is the natural result of refusing to participate in something that drains him. This makes his silence the most decisive act of all. He is no longer invested in proving his worth to someone who couldn't see it. He has moved his energy inward, and that shift is final. Ironically, it is often after he walks away that his value becomes undeniable. The presence that was taken for granted now becomes the standard against which others are measured. The irony stings because by the time the realization comes, it's already too late. The man who once poured himself into someone else's life has now poured himself into his own. His absence speaks more truth than his words ever could. And once he has chosen silence over struggle, there is no going back. The final stage of this shift is not about rejection, but about transformation. When a man fully embraces the decision to stop chasing, his entire standard for life changes. He no longer views relationships as the central purpose of his existence. Instead, he begins to see them as optional, something that can complement his life, but never define it. This realization rewrites the script he was given since childhood, that his worth was tied to being chosen, to being accepted, to proving himself endlessly to someone else. Once he steps away from that conditioning, he starts building a new foundation. One rooted in permanence rather than fleeting approval. He invests in his health, his craft, his career, his finances, his friendships, and his passions. These are the things that cannot be taken from him by emotional manipulation, legal paperwork, or shifting expectations. Each step he takes in this direction deepens his independence, and with it, his power. This change does not make him colder. It makes him stronger. He speaks less, but his words carry more weight. He no longer wastes energy explaining himself to people who only half listened. He stops broadcasting his every plan and instead allows the results to speak for him. His discipline grows because his energy is no longer scattered. His confidence rises because it is no longer tied to external validation. And with each quiet improvement, he becomes more magnetic, not because he is playing games, but because he is living with purpose. Ironically, it is in this state of self-sufficiency that he begins to attract higher quality attention than ever before. But this time, he does not leap toward it. He evaluates it carefully because his peace has become priceless. He will not trade it away cheaply. From the outside, it may appear that these men have given up on love. But what they've actually abandoned is the illusion of love that demanded self-betrayal to survive. They have stopped signing unspoken contracts that only benefited the other side. They have stopped chasing temporary highs in exchange for long-term instability. Instead, they've chosen mastery, the mastery of their bodies, their finances, their minds, and their emotions. This mastery builds a sense of permanence in a world obsessed with the temporary. And permanence is powerful because once a man has it, he becomes untouchable. No one can bait him into losing his balance because his balance is no longer external, eternal. The paradox is clear. The moment a man no longer needs a woman to feel complete, the quality of the women he attracts skyrockets. But by then, he has already raised his standards to match the value he has built in himself. He is no longer impressed by beauty alone. He seeks alignment, respect, and peace, and if those aren't present, he walks away without hesitation. For him, the greatest revenge is not replacing her with someone else. The greatest revenge is replacing the old version of himself with a stronger, freer, more disciplined man. He wakes up every day in a life he designed for himself, not one dictated by the need for constant validation. And in doing so, he proves a final truth. The man who chooses himself doesn't just escape the game, he rewrites it entirely.